But I think it's important to recognize the optionalities of a country like Indonesia with 280 million people, 15th largest GDP, $1.5 trillion. I think it's looking in every direction to try to be able to move up the value chain and the global geopolitical order. But I think, cutting a deal with the Europeans on the fighter jets, I think is a manifestation of not only Indonesia's projection of internationalism, but also the advancement of technological innovation in Europe. And this is something that I think he's going to continue looking into.
Do you think if Indonesia, do you think it's a big consideration to think about, obviously, the country as well as the region's neutrality between the U.S. and China at this point in time? Do you think that it is actually getting harder? And do you think that is also being reflected in recent Indonesia's moves with the European Union as well?
No, I don't think so. I'm in a camp that truly believes that China and the West, inclusive of the U.S. and the West and Western European countries, I think are going to continue being indispensable inevitabilities for a long time. And Indonesia, I think, is going to lean more towards China for technological, allocation purposes in the context of what we consume on a day-to-day basis. And this is not on the back of our thinking that China is a 0 to 1, but China has just been able to produce goods and services at a much more efficient, effective manner, which are affordable for many countries in Southeast Asia, many of which earn still less than $2,000. Of course, Singapore earns more than $90,000 per capita per year. And the U.S. and the West, I think, are natural economic capital allocators in the long run for countries like Indonesia.
Yeah, and obviously a lot of countries are facing high-level, eye-watering level of U.S. tariffs. We're watching a lot of different regions and countries and meeting in order to sort of beat that and advance their trade pacts as well. And obviously, as I mentioned, with Indonesia and the EU announcing their agreement to do so. It's a feel-good headline, obviously, for both parties, but how feasible is it when it comes to agreeing, seeing eye to eye when it comes to some of the regulatory hurdles that Indonesia needs to go through? Deforestation law in the EU is a great example that Indonesia might find very challenging.
Correct. But I think it's important for Indonesia to focus on the long term. The long term, I think, dovetails to areas such as educational attainment, so that we can communicate better, we can negotiate better, we can move up the value chain. I think deforestation has been an issue for a while, but keep in mind that 80 to 90% of the households in Indonesia are headed up by somebody without a tertiary education. So that's something that I think Prabowo is looking into, taking a view a lot more proactively than previously. And to the extent that we can take a view proactively on stuff like that, I think we can better communicate our narrative to the rest of the world, and we can hopefully, take whatever view that's necessary as for us to be accepted a lot better internationally.
Gita, I want to talk about the recent developments with regards to Indonesia's negotiations for a better trade deal with the U.S. because it involves oil and gas. And as we've seen, energy has become politicized once again, albeit in terms of trade. Now, we're talking about $15.5 billion in possible imports from the U.S. to help balance out this trade. And it strikes me as quite ironic because 40, 50 years ago, Indonesia was a major producer of oil and gas, actually, until maybe about 20, 30 years ago when, I guess, the demands of the domestic population caught up with their ability to export and provide oil. We do know that Indonesia is also trying to discover oil and gas deposits around Indonesia at the moment. Again, do you see perhaps the importation of oil and gas to continue for Indonesia, or do you think that at some point Indonesia will find a balance where they're also producing oil and gas while also meeting the needs through certain importations as well, sir?
I think short-term and mid-term, potentially yes. And I think the reason why we've been on a decline in terms of exploration and exploitation with respect to oil and gas has been on the back of our lack of ability to attract foreign capital. Our FDI on a yearly basis has been averaging around $30 billion. Singapore has been getting about $100 to $140 billion a year. And that's in the context of ASEAN or Southeast Asia is getting about $200 to $230 billion per year. And the reason why we're not attracting as much or more than whatever Singapore has been getting is the lack of rule of law. And that's, I think, predominant. And secondarily, our inability to translate uncertainties into risks. Uncertainties are unknown unknowns, and risks are known unknowns, stuff that you can measure, predict, and price. And this is, I think, characteristic of most members of the Global South who are not blessed with the wherewithal to translate, uncertainties into risks that can be quantified and priced. So I think midterm, long term, I think Indonesia should be able to get much better and stuff like that. And that will, I think, bring about a little bit, if not more, of the massive liquidity that's pervasive in the U.S. and the West, amounting to about $140 trillion worth of liquidity, which I think inevitably will need to be diversified away for better risk-adjusted returns on the back of rising risk premiums in the West. And I think Southeast Asia should see this as a golden opportunity.